Welcome, everyone. I'm Michael Dehaan, co-founder and financial wellness leader of Quantum Leap Global. And I've got Jem Fuller with me today. How are you, Jem?
I'm really well, thanks, Michael. Thank you.
Thanks for coming on this interview. So I was introduced to Jem by Karen McDermott, who we both know well. So she's a publisher, and I think supports people to tell their story, really, which is, and beyond that, we were just talking just before we came live in regard to that storytelling and how important that is really to change people's lives, really. So a bit of background around Jem. So Jem's just launched a book, and that's really what sort of interested me. And it was more around the title, which is The Art of Conscious Communication for Thoughtful Men. And I know it's for women as well, but I think that sort of consciousness that we're seeing globally at the moment, and I do think it is a part of COVID. So that's certainly one good thing that's come out of COVID around that sort of consciousness and being present. So a bit of a background with Jem. So you're a leadership executive coach. You're an author. I can confirm that. You're a speaker, specialise in resilience and culture. And I'm really interested in probably unpacking that sort of culture side, because you've probably got many stories around that and how businesses say they do something and whether they actually do it. But you've been doing that for 8.5 years. But I'd love to, I know you've got an interesting past. So I'd love for you to share, I suppose, for 2 or 3 minutes, just a bit about your past so people can get to know you personally.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's funny, you know, if I look back now, I certainly packed a lot of colourful experiences into my past, and it was all reasonably accidental. You know, I was just following what I wanted to do as I was growing up. I had a pretty standard childhood, growing up in Melbourne, middle class, went to a good school, everything was pretty normal. And then the bigger experiences that kind of stood out, halfway through year 12, my best mate died after a motorcycle accident.
Sorry to hear that.
Yep. So that was my first up close introduction to death and grief, and not the last. But that was certainly stand out. He was in a coma over my 18th birthday, and I was sitting bedside with him. And then 5 days after my birthday, they switched off the machines. Yeah. So that kind of threw me into a bit of it threw me off the normal standard cookie cutter life. You know, from there, I really didn't want to go to uni and get a degree and get a job and get married and get a house and do that normal thing. I just kind of ran away from it all. And then, actor, singer, songwriter, and then traveling to make money. Fell in love with travel, really fell in love with going as far from our standard culture, what I knew as a culture, and really exploring, you know, vast and varied ways that humans live. So that kind of fueled me through my 20s and early 30s, and the number of different jobs that I did just to save money while I was on the road. So kindergarten teacher in Taiwan, global tattooist, fire dancer, motorcycle courier, labourer, volunteer in third world countries, all sorts of things.
Yeah.
And so that just kept traveling until fell in love in my early 30s. And when we kept traveling together after we got married. And then when we decided to have kids, we came back home to Australia, and early 30s, and we had kids, and I had to provide and had no career, no qualifications, no nothing. And I was like, wow, what am I going to do? I've got to get my act together so I can, be provider. Yeah. So I went and got a job with a travel company because I'd been traveling for a long time, and had a really fun and successful, predominantly career with them, just over 8 years, but ended up, climbing up the ranks, so to speak, and ended up in senior leadership. 150 staff, quite a large region that was my business that I was in charge of. So then starting to, understand and find out about senior leadership and the corporate world, most of which didn't gel with me. This whole pressure that leaders, especially corporate leaders, are under to just grow net profit, month on month, quarter on quarter, year on year. If you're not growing net profit, you're out, kind of thing. Yeah. And that pressure led me to, move away from my core values, drinking way too much booze, not surfing enough, not spending enough time with my kids. Yeah. It wasn't great. And then I had my midlife crisis / opportunity, I call it, which I'm very grateful for, in my early 40s. and everything turned on a dime. It really was a midlife crisis. Lost my job, had to end the marriage, had to sell the house, everything, but it was all for the best. And it really put me on the path that I'm on now and have been on for the last 9 years or so, 8 or 9 years, which is a wonderful path. Yes, so now jumping to the end of that story, I coach executive leaders. I work in organisations to help them build healthier, more vibrant cultures. Up until COVID, I run leadership retreats in the Himalaya and in Bali and in Northern Australia. I have a wonderful, beautiful, conscious relationship now, a new relationship. My kids are teenagers and we get along great. We live down the coast and I surf a lot, so life's pretty good.
You've certainly packed a lot of stuff into your life.
Yeah.
And I think what resonated with me, and I looked at your sort of LinkedIn profile, is that one of our ethos is igniting human and business potential. And it's all well and good to say that, but how does that show up every day? And some of the things that you've got on there, which is creating that culture, conscious leadership, and leaders that are adaptive and they breathe life into that culture. And one thing that I really resonated with is keeping up the cultural momentum. I've been with businesses that they've got their culture or their ethos on the wall. And it was interesting, this going back quite a number of years, is that they would ask the staff what the culture was. And every second week they'd ask the same question, and there was about 5 different things that described their culture, and people generally couldn't recite them. Really struggled to recite them. And the CEO at the time there, he'd always get really disappointed, and I'm going, well, maybe you've got to have a look at why they can't remember them or why they can't recite them.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. It's I use this term that we should be trying to create and then curate a culture where culture is a focus. So it's part of our culture that we talk about culture all the time. And there's various different ways to do that. You can design strategies or parts of processes and embed them into a process specifically to incentivize and remind and drive culture. And that's the reason why step 3 is in this process. It's about culture. So we can be really intentional and conscious about it. But I think also, you speak to any business owner or leader of an organization, and humans are at the same time the biggest headache, but also when we really can tap into this human-centric quality of any organization, that's the bit that works. That's the bit that makes it what it is. And so when we can spend the time understanding human drivers, human motivations, there are some macro human behavioral patterns that apply to all of us. And yes, we have our micro idiosyncrasies, we've got our differences. We've all got a different fingerprint, so to speak. But we also have a lot of things in common.
Yeah.
And humans are meaning-making machines. We want something to mean. We need meaning behind something. If there's no meaning, there's no motivation to take action. But if we can tap into our people's some sense of purpose for them beyond survival, right, beyond just paying the bills, what do they actually really care about? If we can find that out and it aligns with the organization's higher purpose, you're in a much better place already.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. I think that creates that strong culture. I wanted to talk a little bit about sort of inclusion. We spoke a few weeks ago around, I suppose, people wearing masks, but also that inclusion with either minorities or women, and every employee feeling heard and feeling safe, sort of speak their mind. That's sort of that equality, respect, and inclusion that's, I think, can be lacking, but it's a strong business that can create that. So what have you sort of seen around that sort of inclusion? Diversity inclusion, I think it just rolls off the tongue.
Yeah.
It's very hard to deliver.
Yeah, I think it's more important than we understand. There's a lot of corporates that are ticking the box and doing what they feel like they should do or have to do. Some of them are doing it to comply. Some of them believe in what they're doing. I believe that it's actually diversity inclusion. I believe it's actually way more important than we think it is. When you think about it, if we've got a big problem to solve and we've got quite a narrow bandwidth of of culture trying to solve that problem. So we've got Western middle class white males trying to solve a problem with similar backgrounds. They've grown up in the same culture. They've gone to the same kind of schools. You've only got this much bandwidth of diversity of ideas and creation and that solution kind of mindset that's coming to it is only that wide. But when we come and invite people to problem solve collaboratively, and you're talking with people who've come from very different backgrounds, different gender, different culture, different race, as much difference as possible.
Yeah.
The bandwidth now is this wide.
Yes.
We're going to come up with solutions that we couldn't come up with before.
Yeah.
So I think it's really important. And on a global scale at the moment, one of the things that's so upsetting to watch is that with all of this identity politics and public shaming and cancel culture, people are shouting at each other. And that's not helping the situation.
Right.
People who have difference are just shouting at each other. If we can remember that, if we can collectively combine those bigger world problems like climate change and pandemics and things like this, they don't discriminate. We're all going to cop it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. No, you make some really valid points. And I suppose I'd want to lead into now that sort of conscious communication, because I think that's a part of what we're an overlay of everything we spoke about so far. I know you've written the book about it, but what does it actually mean, this sort of conscious communication? What does it mean?
Well, quite literally, being more conscious of something is being more aware of it. So quite often we get lost in our ego, in our sense of identity in any moment, but for the purpose of what you and I are talking about in the communication, quite often we get lost in the communication. Quite often we're sitting there waiting to react or waiting to jump in. We know what we want to say and we're just waiting for the other person or waiting for a break for us to make our point.
Yes.
Yeah. And so it's really self-serving. Yeah. And more conscious communication, the idea behind that is that it's really that the success of the communication itself is more important than the individuals involved. Yeah. If I've got something that I want to share with you and I'm hoping for you to understand what I'm wanting to communicate, then the success of that is more important than me and my agenda and my sense of identity. So it's really an act of service, this idea of conscious communication, serving the greater good, serving the communication itself. And the more aware we are, the better positioned we are, I think, to communicate. And that entails a lot of things. So understanding, what is the purpose of this communication that we're having right now? Is it to relay information, or is it to express an emotion, or what is the purpose of the communication? Who am I talking to? How do you prefer to receive information? We're all wired slightly differently. Yeah. What is it that I'm actually wanting to say? What's the best context or format for this communication? Sometimes putting something emotional in a text isn't going to work. Pick up the phone, so really coming back to the basics. But yeah, so the book's really about that, but also for men particularly, you and I were chatting about this another time, how we've grown up in a culture where we're taught that we don't have access to our emotions. We're taught not to cry like a girl. I don't know if you ever heard that when you were a kid, but I certainly heard that. Yeah. Right? Suck it up, stiff upper lip, all of this kind of stuff that we're taught culturally. And you hear things like, oh, men can't access their emotions, or men can't communicate emotionally, and all of these things that we're told, which I believe are actually rubbish. I think men do have emotions. we just don't feel like we're allowed to kind of indulge or express them. So yeah, there's a big part in the book about that too.
Would it be so far to say that it becomes a part of our programming, because we're told so often? Yeah. And it actually becomes our program, and it runs our subconscious mind, where we actually don't believe we can, and we actually fully believe that.
Completely. That's exactly what happens. Yeah. And I think it's time for us for us men to support each other to evolve. Yeah. Rewrite the paradigm. Let's rewrite the stereotypes. It's time for us to move beyond it, because, within any population of people, I reckon most people are good people, or they're trying to be. Most people are kind. Most people are not evil, right? Yeah. And then you get a minority of people who are dysfunctional, let's say. They behave badly. And, over the last year, there's been some politicians that have behaved really badly,
Yeah.
male politicians that have behaved really badly. And so then you've got this brand of male or men, which is not good. And most of us are not like that. Most of us would never try to hurt anybody.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
we just don't know. I just think that men don't know how to hold each other accountable and start changing the culture. Because, I don't know if you remember, there was a football player, I think a rugby player, and he got into trouble because he said, in an interview, he said, I'm just going to go down the pub and pull something. Anything will do.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah. So surely he wasn't, he wasn't, that was a cultural terrible thing to say.
Yeah.
Right. But his mates probably just went, oh, he didn't mean anything bad by it. It's all right. His mates didn't know how to say, privately to him, didn't know how to say, hey, mate, let's change the way we talk.
Yeah.
Why not? Why don't we change the way we talk? That's disrespectful to women, what you said. Let's shake it up. Let's change it, And so I don't think that men feel comfortable. A lot of men, I don't think they feel comfortable with each other to call each other on improving.
Yeah. And that, as you said, so that goes, that sort of societal norms and conditioning.
Yeah.
And I'm interested in your thoughts around, so we're looking at sort of, especially in businesses, corporates, that feminine, masculine traits, and it doesn't what gender per se, and the feminine traits that sort of bring that sort of compassion, the vulnerability, the inclusion, the caring side of it. So are you saying that, and that's more predominantly with women who are taking on more leadership roles, which I think is fantastic because it creates that really solid balance. What are you seeing in businesses and corporates around that?
Yeah, look, I think there's a massive need for more feminine energy to be allowed in business, especially in leadership. And I say feminine energy because both males and females have access to feminine energy.
Yeah.
And males and females have access to masculine energy as well. And yes, by all means, we should be having more women in leadership roles. We need it, but allowing them to bring their feminine.
Yes.
Not telling them that they have to, get all masculine. And I don't mean to generalize and say, but the shoulder pads and the power suits and the coming in there and I'm going to fight with the men and I'm going to do it the masculine way. Well, good on you for being empowered enough to get in there. But I think collectively, we really need to be encouraging some more feminine intelligence, which is more human-centric, right, in our organizations. So the masculine energy is get the result, strategize, big picture, take action. The feminine energy is let's care about each other while we do it. And we need both.
Yeah, and not to feel judged, in this sort of patriarchal sort of...
Yeah, not to feel judged. It's interesting because another cultural meme that we've created and adopted for men is that vulnerability is a weakness.
Yeah.
Right. When vulnerability in leadership, the appropriate amount of vulnerability is actually a strength because it allows people to connect more authentically with you because they go, oh, you're not a superhero. You're just a human being like me.
Yeah.
I was sitting around coaching an executive leadership team and the CEO, who was female, was sitting around the board table and we're going around. She was under a lot of pressure at home. Things were going on. And it was her turn to talk and she started crying. And then she was trying to wipe away the tears and apologize. Oh, I'm sorry. I said, hey, stop apologizing. Just be where you're at right now and share your story. And so she cried and she shared her story.
Wow.
After that, we went around the table and I asked the other executive leaders, how do you feel now after your CEO just shared like that? And they all went in their own way. They said they felt more connected to her. Yeah. They felt safer. They felt more allowed to be who they are. They felt that they could be vulnerable. It just opened up the whole
feedback. Yeah. Wow. And I'm going to put you on the spot a bit. So with the book, if I read your book, and I know that's all from you and whatnot, but what would be one takeaway? What would be the light bulb moment that you'd want someone to take away from reading your book?
Oh, wow. That is putting me on the spot. What would be the light bulb moment to take away from the book? Look, I'm really hoping to give people some tools and it doesn't matter what gender you are, I'm hoping you get something from the book. But I'm really hoping to give some tools that people feel they can actually implement to improve their ability to communicate, you know? And that is the primary reason I wrote the book. A lot of people write a book to be positioned as an expert in something, or as a business card, or for whatever reason they write a book, and that's okay. But my primary reason for writing the book was I'm really hoping people read it and it helps, right?
Yeah.
So the takeaway is the tools that I share in there, and I've tried to make them really simple. They're not necessarily easy, but simple and implementable, and to make a difference. Because when you think about it, Michael, communication underpins our ability to be successful in anything that we do, whether it's our intimate relationship, or whether it's having an idea and manifesting that idea into reality. That depends completely on our ability to be able to communicate the idea, to problem solve, communication. Every time I'm working with an executive leader, the problems that they're tearing their hair out with come down to communication.
Exactly right. Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. So in regard to your book, would there be a link that I could share later with the audience?
Yeah, absolutely. Probably just easiest to grab it off my website. So the website's just jemfuller.com, JEMFULLER.com, and then find the books page on the website. It's just /books, and you can buy it from there.
I appreciate that, and thank you for your time. I knew I'd learn a lot. I knew, I think the things that you share really is this sort of conscious, it's not the beginning because we've been around for a while, but it is a new beginning, I'm going to say.
Yeah, I really think it is. And just like you said, you know, we are evolving, whether we like it or not. It might feel sometimes like we're evolving quite slowly, and it might feel that there are pockets of people dragging their feet, but it's unavoidable. Change is one of the givens, right? And so if we can change with volition, with some intention, to open our minds, you know, we're naturally very closed-minded, and this confirmation bias thing and the whole social media echo chambers, you know, the algorithms are designed to just keep giving us information that backs up our own ideology and our own belief. But there's so many ways, and for us to just loosen our grip a little bit on how we think things should be, and this book hopefully will help people to do that.
Oh, that's great. And again, I appreciate your time, and thank you for again sharing your wisdom. So thank you very much, Tim.
You're welcome, Michael. Thank you.